will be our speaker today. And Ellen is a professor of law and the director of international programs at Drake University Law School. In 2014, Professor Yee founded Next Course, Food Recovery Network at Drake, a student program at Drake University. Students learn about food insecurity, waste, and recovery by creatively working to develop a food recovery system and to educate the campus and local community about important food justice issues. Please help me in joining Professor Yee to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. As the introduction stated, I'm a professor of law, and actually my background is in criminal law, and I also direct our international programs. So you may be thinking to yourselves, as you should be right now, like, what am I doing here? Let me just tell you a little bit about that. Now, first of all, I've never let being unqualified stop me, so that's number one. But number two is, so I'm a lawyer, right? I'm a former prosecutor. I teach criminal law, I teach trial advocacy, I teach professional ethics, and I teach international criminal law. And, but what you need to know about me is that I grew up with parents that grew up during the Depression. And so in our household, it was just the way things worked that we didn't waste things. It was just the ethos that my parents had. We recycled before recycling was a thing, just because it was still useful. Therefore, why would you ever throw it away? And then, I went to college, I went to law school, and then I would go to all these networking events where there would be food and wine, right? Because lawyers are just like students. Free food, you show up, right? So I would be at all these networking events, but people were much more interested in networking of trying to get a job or trying to get some business, and there would be this beautiful display of food that was presented by the hosts of whatever organization that was hosting the networking event, and hardly anyone would ever touch it because you were there to kind of do business, right? And so I would go to these things, and I would think to myself at the end of them, you look at there's almost a full cheese tray, there's the fruit tray, there's the charcuterie tray, and I would look at them and I would leave and I would think, oh my gosh, like, what's going to happen with that? And, I always wanted to say to, the staff that was there, can you just, pack that up and I'll stick it in my purse? But you can't do that when you're at a professional event. And so, after years of doing that, I finally said to myself, this is ridiculous, I should do something about it. And I didn't really know what to do anything. I didn't know anything about anything at all. But I started asking around, and really what I realized is, now I work at a university. And I thought, okay, the law school is totally separate. We don't use the cafeteria or anything. But I thought, okay, I work at a university. Maybe there's something I could do here. So I called up the dining hall, and I said, hey, what do you guys do with the stuff that you have left over? And they said, well, we get rid of it, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I don't think you need to do that. I think we can do something with it. We can donate it. And, I kept getting the runaround. So, this is honestly, I think, the only time that I use my title for anything to pull rank. But I sent an email to the manager, and I said, this is Ellen Yee. I'm a professor in the law school, and I would really like to meet with you. I didn't say anything of what I wanted, right? I didn't want to get shut down from the get-go. And so he said, okay, I'll meet with you. He didn't know any idea of what I wanted to do. And so I met him, and I came fully prepared with my closing argument about why we should do food recovery at Drake University. And I sat down, his name was Danny, and I sat down with him, and I started with my argument. As point after point, with my explanations, with my rationale, all of this kind of stuff. And after about 3 or 4 minutes, and I am not exaggerating, he looked at me and he said, let's do it. And I did not know what to do. I had 15 more minutes of argument. And I was ready to this being trial run number 1, and I was ready for number 2 and number 3 and number 4. Literally after 3 to 5 minutes, he said, let's do it. And I was stunned. I mean, my mouth was hanging open. I didn't say anything for the next 10 seconds. I didn't know what to do. And I said, oh, well, okay. And then I said, there's I don't have any help. I don't have any money. I don't have any. And he looked at me and he said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it until you figure it out. Okay, so I guess the main thing that I would want to get across today is that, you know, an idea, a little bit of effort, right, is a seed, and occasionally you water it and it will grow into something. And I will show you what that has grown into a little bit later in my remarks today. So we started, and he said to me, you know, one of the things that we do that produces a lot of waste is the Drake relays. We have all these tents set up, those of you that are from the area, we have all these tents set up over 3 days. We have these races, and there's a lot of waste that happens there, so why don't you start there? So I scrounged around, I found 2 students, I found 1 colleague, and over the course of that weekend, we recovered hundreds and hundreds of pounds of food that we donated to the local shelter. It was 3 days, we did 2 runs a day to the shelter. There was so much stuff. And you know, at the end of the 3 days, I thought, you know, if nothing ever comes of this, I'll be pretty happy with the fact that I did something. But obviously I didn't want to stop there. In fact, over the rest of the summer, I started to think about what really could come of this. And I work at an educational institution, so I really should think about what I possibly could do with this. And so today I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story of how that happened. The title of my talk is Empowering the Next Generation, which is actually really funny because that's not the title of my talk. The conference organizers apparently came up with that name. This is the real title of my talk. Next course, an academic and service learning approach to campus food waste and recovery. I think that was too boring and there would be like 2 of you here. So this is actually what I'm going to talk a little bit about. And what I do on campus is, you know, our real job is to educate. And this is a program of education which has been such an awesome experience for me and everyone who's been involved in it. But the first thing that I do is I get into classrooms and I get exposure to students and I teach them a little bit about food waste. So I go through and I talk about food insecurity, waste, and introduce the idea of recovery. So I start out sort of with the big picture of there are a lot of people in this world that are undernourished. And I introduce the idea of food insecurity, which, as you all know, is different than hunger. But it starts to sort of, you know, get minds going, especially with first, second, and second year students. And then we talk a little bit about what are some of the causes of hunger. But then we talk also about that hunger is a cause of poverty, and it's this continuous cycle. Which really gets students thinking about things. And then I bring it into America, right? And I introduce, like, what is the situation here in our own country? And then I bring it into Iowa to bring it really close to home because they're on campus here at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. So I bring it into Iowa and they realize that it is not a problem that happens in sub-Saharan Africa. It's not just something that happens in the ghettos of the large cities, but it's something that happens right here at home. And then we introduce a little bit about like the impact of waste, what the definition is, and right, what some of the statistics are, which is obviously shocking to someone who's never heard these statistics before. The most shocking thing to me is that the per capita food waste has continued to increase dramatically. So it's not one of those things that all of this awareness, which has been increasing over the past several years, has not yet manifested in reducing the amount. We talk about the sources of waste from the whole chain of production from farming to the very end, the different kinds of waste from the different kinds of food, and the environmental impact. And so this really touches upon students in a way that, regardless of what they're interested in, it could in some way, shape, or form speak to them. So you might be a person who's interested in social justice, and you're interested in those poverty issues and those hunger issues. Or you might be someone who's in the sciences, who's really interested in the environmental impact. And so this project has really related to a lot of different areas of the university. So, you know, I talk a little bit about that, and then talk about why we waste some of the food that we do, why we should care, and what we can do about it. So after that short introduction of the problem, you know, we suggest, well, what can I do? Well, recovery is obviously one option that you're aware of. I introduced the food recovery hierarchy, and I talk about the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, that we can donate it. right, from to a nonprofit organization. So, and then I introduced the idea of Next Course. Next Course is the organization that we started at Drake about 4 years ago, and so I want to tell you a little bit about that. It's called Next Course because it's a multiple meaning kind of name. Obviously, a course is a part of a meal. A course, though, on a university campus is an opportunity to learn. And most importantly, a course is a path forward. We're not just dealing with the here and now, we're trying to think of solutions for the future. So that's really the vision of what Next Course is about. All right, so what are we doing at the university? So we launched in 2014, and the program is now integrated into the curriculum and into co-curricular activities. And my statistics are a little old, but between the time and when we started in last February, we've recovered almost 30,000 pounds from just the university. And so, you know, that makes me feel really, I don't know, it feels great, right? Because all of that stuff would be in a landfill here in Des Moines somewhere. And it's stuff we've recovered from campus. This was our first recovery. That's my colleague right there, and those are our first 2 students who participated in the project. This is the group the next year with some of the staff there at Sodexo. So it really is a partnership between the university itself and our food service provider, Sodexo. So we are part of the Food Recovery Network. I'm not sure if you are all aware of that, but it's a network of universities that recover from campus. We were like the 90-somethingth chapter. There are now 230 chapters across the country. It started in 2011, and there have been more than 2 million pounds of food recovered from college campuses over the course of that time. Our community partners, we obviously work with Eat Greater Des Moines, and we donate to 5 separate recipient agencies. So that's kind of what we do. We're on social media all over the place. But here's the thing. Food recovery is a stopgap measure, right? Well, what we really want to do is we want to reduce the overproduction, and we want to reduce the environmental impacts. And so one of our objectives is simply to move the food from the university, right, things that would have gone into the garbage, to members in our community who are in need. Right? That's one of the things that we do. But that's a really, really temporary fix. Really temporary fix, right? It addresses a couple of issues. It addresses an environmental issue. It addresses a hunger issue. And it's fairly simple to do, right? It takes us about a half an hour, twice or 2 or 3 times a week. But we're at a university, and my objective with this program is not just to move the food. It is to impact this next generation, to teach and to learn about it through this project, so that we can have all of those young minds who are interested in some way, shape, or form to go out into the world in whatever it is that they do, to start to look at the root causes of some of these issues and to integrate that into their lives in the future. So that's really what we're about. And so, you know, at Drake we have a mission. It's to prepare students for meaningful personal lives, professional accomplishments, and global citizenship. So I thought, well, that kind of fits into that, which was my sales pitch to the university. And it's also part of our strategic plan. All, I would imagine, of the companies that you're affiliated with, the institutions that you're affiliated with, have something in their mission statement that you can say this fits into their mission. Right? It's not hard to fit into someone's mission. And so it was very easy for me to say, this project fits into your mission. And so how we've integrated it is through service learning. So how many of you are familiar with that concept of service learning? Okay, a few of you. Oh, great, like one of you that I thought. I had no idea what that was at the time. But it turns out that we have an Office of Community Engagement and Service Learning at our university. At the law school, like, we're totally separate, like I had no idea that existed. But we work on that at the university, mostly on the undergrad level. And the university hires students over the course of the academic year to serve as ServiceLearning Ambassadors. So I learned that this existed. I thought, I could use one of those. So I got in touch with that office, and I made a pitch for having a ServiceLearning Ambassador position created to work on next course. Because if any of you have worked with students or revolving groups of people, continuity is a really hard thing. And also with students in the course of their academic year, their life cycle, right? And there's like 2 or 3 weeks at the end of every semester where, you know, they couldn't be bothered with you, which is as it should be, right? But if you're running an organization, you actually need to run like all the time. And so I knew I needed a student who was responsible, a student who I thought deserved to be paid. And so we have a lot of student volunteers, but I do have a Service Learning Ambassador. So let me just tell you a little bit about Service Learning. It's a type of experiential education rather than the passive type of education that many of us who are older experienced when we were in college, that pursues both academic learning and meets a relevant community-defined need. So there are those 2 aspects to service learning: service to the community and learning on the part of the participant, right? The recipient, the student, with intentionally integrating the use of effective and ongoing reflection and assessment. So that's really one of the major aspects of service learning that I have started to understand that makes a difference. It's that reflection on what you're doing. And so even if you don't work in an academic environment, even if you don't work in a university environment, I assume that many of you work with volunteers. And I encourage you to incorporate this concept of service learning into the work that you do, particularly with volunteers, but even with, you know, non-volunteers, with people that you work with. To take from an experience the opportunity and the time to reflect on it and to think more deeply about it. So, you know, one of the exercises that we do in service learning is a 3-step process. It's to objectively describe what happened, is question number 1, right? Objectively just describe what happened, what you observed in the most objective terms possible. Number 2, so what? So what's the meaning of that? What insight do you have based upon what it is that you experienced or observed? And the third thing is, so what now? Right? What are you going to do with that insight? And so that kind of reflection makes a world of difference. So we don't just have students who are going to the dining hall, getting 10 trays of food, driving it 15 minutes across town, and dropping it off at the local shelter. That's awesome community service, right? That's awesome volunteer work. It's bringing them into the bowels of the kitchen, which they probably haven't been to before. It's bringing them to the homeless shelter, which they may not have been to before either, right? So that's really great. But if it's literally the 20 to 30 minutes that it takes to do that, and it's just like, oh, I saw this, oh, I saw that, okay, I'm done, right? It doesn't really get you where you want someone to go with this process. And so integrating reflection and assessment to that process makes all the difference in the world when someone is learning about this, to really take the time and deliberately and intentionally process that experience, raise questions in your own mind about that experience, express reactions and emotions about that experience, really gets people to the next level. And so I encourage you, if you have volunteers that you work with in your organizations, this creates a kind of understanding and commitment, and it spurs ideas that you would not get otherwise if you didn't intentionally incorporate this type of thing into what it is that you're doing. So, so this is a little chart that kind of describes, so service learning is right in the middle, and it's the spectrum. So over here we have total volunteerism, right? You volunteer, it's totally community service. The beneficiary is the recipient agency that's getting the food, for example, in this circumstance, right? And over on that end of the spectrum, that's what you have. And that's really service heavy, service based. That's what a lot of people do on their volunteer time, right? Is they show up at the shelter and they serve food at Thanksgiving, right? Very service based. On the right hand side of the chart is really the learning part of the spectrum. More of an internship type of thing, right? So for so many people, internships or having an intern there really isn't terribly helpful, right? You spend as much time teaching the intern about things as you are getting work out of the intern, but that's the point of an internship, right? An internship is a learning opportunity for the intern. Yes, they contribute, but one of the main points of an internship is for that person to be exposed to the area of work that they're interning in and to learn about it. And so, field education, internship is on that end of that spectrum. And the provider, the student, is really the beneficiary in that situation. And so service learning is ideally smack dab in the middle, right? That it's a mutual relationship with the beneficiary and the provider of providing service, but you're meeting a community-defined need, and you're interacting in a way that both benefits the learner as well as benefits the beneficiary. And so that's really what we aim to do, is to hit that middle spot. I also talk about best practices. It's being very clear about the learning process with the volunteer or the student, to engage them in purposeful actions. It's not just this is where you pick up the food and this is where you drop off the food, but talk about the bigger picture, what the whole point is. To articulate what the goals are. And I would encourage you to do this with volunteers as well, because I think providing that context makes a really big difference, because everyone wants to help out and everyone is in fact curious. And as the organizers, we can provide this larger context. So establishing criteria for selecting the community service. Train the community partners so that they understand their role as co-educators. This is a big thing. So that for us, for example, the recipients from our community organizations, they know that these students are coming, they know what the students are about, and they interact with them. And it is just really such a pleasure, because oftentimes you go and you drop off the food, and whoever it is who's in that kitchen is like super excited to get your random 3 trays of broccoli and your random 10 bags of hot dog buns, right? And it's like a cook's challenge for them. But and they react to and interact with the students in a way that is really meaningful. Educating the students regarding the philosophy of service and of service learning. And then here's really the part that we really emphasize, is engaging them in reflection on the experience to help them deepen their understanding of their experience, themselves, the community, the social problems that they're addressing in this activity that they're engaged in. And then we assess. All right. So over the course of these 4 years, I've had 4 paid positions. And so my first Service Learning Ambassador was Laura. She was awesome. Her major was environmental science and sociology, so she was really attracted to the environmental part of it. But she really helped us get going and was an amazing person. My second Service Learning Ambassador was Gabby, who was an English and history major. But Gabby was interesting because we started out with a first-year seminar fall semester class. We were integrated in this class that was called The Real Hunger Games, which taught students about food insecurity and issues like that, right? So they did readings all semester long. They wrote papers for that class, and they integrated this experience into what they were doing. They not only actually did the deliveries, but they helped me figure out what to even do. Quite honestly, that's what the students did over the course of the semester. And interestingly enough, about, I would say maybe halfway through the semester, Gabby was one of the students. She was a fall semester freshman, right? She had just arrived on campus. She was in this semester seminar with maybe there's probably about 25 or 30 students in a first year seminar. And about halfway through the semester, Gabby opened up to her fellow classmates. And she told them, look, I came from a family, right? My mom was a waitress. There were 4 of us kids. We often didn't know where our next meal was coming from. And it was such a powerful experience, because here she was with, kids from all over the place, many of whom grew up in, upper middle class families from the suburbs, and all of a sudden, here was this person who was in their class all along, who, they thought they were helping other people, right? Those other people out there that need help, right? And Gabby was in that class, and she very courageously decided to share her personal life
with the rest of the students. And that was just incredibly impactful. I couldn't have thought of a better group of people. I mean, part of the reason why this worked is because of that class. That group of people was amazing. And so Gabby ended up working for us. Julie was here earlier today, and she's a sustainability and resilience major, but she's also majoring in rhetoric, media, and social change. Don't ask me what all of that is, I'm not sure. And then Katie joined us last year, and I don't think Katie's figured out what her major is. And so these are people who devote 6 to 8 hours a week to the project, and they not only coordinate the recoveries, right? That's the really easy part. They have branched out into all sorts of other things. But the really interesting thing was that first year seminar class said, we need to be more than just a class that does this. We need to be a student organization. We need to be integrated into that co-curricular aspect of life on the university campus. And so we became a student organization. We've integrated into the curriculum. So here I have a couple of the courses that have integrated the service learning project into the academic work that they do over the course of the semester. So just take a glance at that. Like, it's sociology, it's rhetoric, it's history. We had a law class that, right, my people, integrated into their class. Journalism and mass communication. And they all found ways in which they could use their discipline to somehow relate to this particular topic. So let me just give you one of the examples. The Masters of Public Administration, it was their capstone. It was a senior level class. And there were a couple of groups that did their capstone project on waste reduction. And so they put together all the data of like what's happening in the Des Moines metro area, right? And provided that all to us. Another great example of what you wouldn't imagine was, do I have it up? Oh, the PR class. Okay, so the PR class is also really interesting. So like in the very beginning of the semester, I go in and I tell them a little bit about the project. And I remember one of the students like raising her hand, and she's like, you know, I'm from wherever it was that she was, and I'm sure that, you know, everyone in the city that I live in already does this food recovery thing. Right? I'm like, okay, maybe. But so over the course of that was an upper level class, and over the course of that semester, they had to put together a whole PR plan for a client, right? And so next course was their client, and we had 2 groups in that PR class that had us as their client. It was so interesting. So I went for their final projects at the end of the semester. They had to like present to the client what the PR and marketing plan was. And you can imagine that over the course of putting together a PR and marketing plan for a client, you have to learn a heck of a lot about the client. And so over the course of that semester, they had to learn all about food insecurity. They had to learn about waste. They had to learn about recovery just to do their marketing project. And so in the end, they were like converts. They couldn't believe that we had this problem, that we didn't have this solution more often than we did. And they put together these amazing marketing projects for us. This was our first class at the shelter here in Des Moines. This is a chart that talks a little bit about sort of the depth that you can get out of a service learning experience, from just the sort of surface broad volunteerism to a deeper, more advanced transformative experience in the university setting with research and so forth. We've been integrated into lots of different co-curricular groups. Here's a bunch of our students doing different things. They brought Ben Simon onto campus, and he was one of the co-creators of the Food Recovery Network in Maryland in 2011. And he's now running this company called Imperfect Produce, where they sell ugly food. Some of the projects that we've dealt with have been totally student-led. So for example, my students said, you know, recovery is like only doing so much. We need to compost. So they got composting on the consumer side of our dining hall. They also picked up this project that another group started of the little free pantries that are around campus, so stocking them and so forth. So it's really quite cool. We also have expanded. So, we kind of like want to take over the world like everyone in here does. So Principal Financial Group is also a Sodexo organization, and so through our connections, we got connected to them. We got them to start recovering, and they have been recovering ever since, let's see, that was 2015. And they have data tracked, and they have found that their food recovery has actually saved them money. Simpson College, we got next course going at Simpson, so Simpson's recovering now. And Grandview is recovering now. Grandview is doing something slightly different. They're addressing their food campus and security problems. And so the food that they're recovering, they're redistributing to students there who are food insecure. All right. It's just a couple of our students engaging in the recovery process. But I'm a lawyer. And I just made an argument to you why service learning is important. I just made an argument to you about how this can be a really important experience. But if you're like me, you're like, what's the evidence, right? And so I introduced to you my Exhibit A, Tess Nesson. So please give Tess a little warm welcome.
Good afternoon. How is everyone doing? Good. It's a great day to be here. Great first day of the summit. Thank you, Ellen, for allowing me to participate in this presentation. So my name is Tess, and I'm a recent graduate from Drake University. I was born and raised in Iowa, Makokata, Iowa. If anyone's from small town, I saw maybe one. Oh, you're just scratching your head? Okay. So I'm from a really small town in eastern Iowa. My mom is the best stay-at-home mom ever, I would say. She volunteers at a local elementary school, and my dad is a small business owner, insurance and real estate, and he definitely has never met a stranger that he didn't like, talk to anyone. So when I started looking for a university, I didn't really know what I wanted. I was thinking that I wanted something small enough, but big enough for growth, and when I came to Drake, I got a feeling, and I wanted to be here. I wanted to be on campus. So my freshman year at Drake was the fall of 2014, and I started my career as a health sciences major. I had this idea that chemistry and biology and calculus, that's what I could do to get to where I wanted to be. And very quickly I found that I hated it. I was bad at it, and I wasn't happy. But as I slowly realized that the world wasn't ending, there was space to grow, I changed my major in the spring, and I started to study public relations and law, politics, and society, and then I also found next course food recovery. So along that way, I remember showing up to the very first meeting, and I met this group of women, 4 or 5 women, who were equally parts inspiring, humble, and intelligent, and I knew that I wanted to be a part of them. I wanted to be part of their team. So I quickly got involved. I became the social media chair for Next Course Food Recovery, which I served in that role for the next 3 years. Along with becoming involved in Next Course, I started to develop a deeper relationship with Sodexo Food Service. And so Sodexo, like Ellen was saying, is our food service provider at Drake. So they employ thousands of people across Iowa, but they're also the largest food service employer in the world. So along the way, I started to develop this relationship. And I realized that there's this huge gap between students and employees. So when I'm in line, I'm trying to get to class on time, I want a sandwich, I'm hungry, and I'm looking at someone, I'm talking to someone, but I don't know anything about them. Now, if you could do one thing for me, just think about your weekly routine. So whether you're taking a lunch break, you're in line at Chipotle, or you're dropping off your clothes at a laundromat, think about those people that you encounter. Now, think about how many of those people you know. Do you know their name? Do you know their favorite food? Do you know if they have a pet? What do you know about them? Do you know the things about them that make them them? So I started this project called Humans of Sodexo. And it became it's a Facebook page, and it was to promote the way that we have relationships with these people that we see on a daily basis, but for one reason or another, we're strangers. So along the process, you can click on photos. So I became friends with a lot of these people, and I created this Facebook page with the understanding that students, teachers, people aren't going to discover extra time in their lives. They're not going to discover extra time in their days. We still only have 24 hours, and we should sleep for 8. So along the way, I became friends with these people. And like right here, if you click on the mouse, down one, this is Rita. She rides her bike to work every day. She wants to go on vacation with her grandchildren someday. And the connections that were made from this would not have happened if I had not been involved in next course food recovery, because the one thing that we all need is food, and the people that create and grow and serve food, a lot of the time they're unknown to us. And this was a project that created a deeper meaning. And Rita right here, she became famous. She's on the left there. Yes, she definitely, she was already a famous face on campus, but people being able to read stories about these people allowed them to have deeper connections when they stood in line and they had conversations. So I think that the next generation needs to be empowered to care. And the root of sustainability and food recovery and everything that we're all doing is caring, because we all care about people. So I think that it's simple to say that that's the most sustainable thing. Just the more that we care about people, the more that this can continue to grow and flourish. And thank you to Ellen for creating Next Course Food Recovery, because if she hadn't, Humans of Sodexo wouldn't have happened.
So I just have to tell you that I didn't know this project existed until this morning. And so this is an example, like I put a little bit of effort 4 years ago. I mean, I still give a little bit of effort, but like I put a little bit of effort. I planted a seed. I water it every now and then there are all of these kids that are involved. I mean, so today Tess was like, oh, a social media chair, I created this thing. And so I skipped one of the first panels and I ended up reading this Facebook page and I was crying. I mean, because Tess has recorded all of their stories. She's transcribed them here. Many of them have amazing stories with their lives and how they've related to not only being involved with the students through Next Course, but just, being involved with the students as food workers on campus. And if you scroll through this, like this woman, right, she has 386 likes. I mean, the students went through and they looked at this stuff. Right, they learned more about the people who they were working with. I just have to tell you, like in one of those first years, when we were training the Sodexo staff on what they needed to do for the recovery and where they needed to stick it in the fridge and stuff like that, I asked the manager if I could show up at their annual sort of before school starts meeting. And he said I had 10 minutes, so of course I took 15. And I talked to them about the project, right? And I talked about food insecurity and things like that. And one of the striking statistics about that is the vast majority of people who are food insecure are full-time employees, right? So I'm talking to like about 100 Sodexo employees, and I say that, and vast majority of heads in that room nodded. I mean, it's not the type of job that pays a lot. And so within that community, I mean, I didn't have to tell them, right? That was their lived experience, not only in their own families, but in their families and friends. And so, that connection for them with this project and that connection for us with them was pretty darn powerful. And so with their jobs, like they get a lot of satisfaction out of it because they know it's going to communities of people in need. And it's part of their job. And I think they all would say that they felt bad throwing away stuff. It was just part of their job, right? And so they come from a socioeconomic, many of them like live in a socioeconomic status where resources are tight. And then at their jobs, they would have to, right, because of regulation and so forth, they would have to throw it away. And so just this feedback loop that we've had between the students, between the Sodexo employees, not only the students involved in next course, but like the students that read these Facebook pages. I mean, you had a couple of examples of some of them that were just amazing. But I mean, this is one of those things where, I mean, I never envisioned that Tess and the next course students and other Drake students would create a human connection with Sodexo from just starting a little food recovery project and moving the food from there to there, right? It's been pretty amazing. And, you know, the courses that have studied it, we've had several graduates go off and somehow, right, integrate this aspect of their lives into what they want to do with the rest of their life. That's amazing. Right? So for example, like Tess, you weren't aware of food recovery as a thing when you came to Drake.
Yeah, it wasn't something that I thought about. I knew I was familiar with the local food bank in my hometown, but I didn't know that food recovery was something that you could do. So,
yeah. So I guess our presentation is mainly, right? It's pretty easy to get something going. Number two, it's pretty easy to have people who inspire you. And it's pretty amazing when you get people who volunteer, right? Because all of this, like Tess has been a volunteer the whole time. And she stuck with it from the moment she was introduced to it, spring semester of her freshman year, all the way through to when she graduated, and she's here today. Right? She's still interested in it.
I'm still hanging out with her. I still try to hang out with her.
And, you know, so integrating the younger people into the projects that you're working on has benefits over the long run. So if any of you can integrate interns into what it is that you do, right, it takes time. It doesn't necessarily make things more efficient at your organizations. But it is so worth the effort. It is so worth the effort because you're giving them an experience that raises questions in their minds and changes the way that they view the world. And, you know, I've worked with student workers, I've worked with interns before, right? And it's like it takes a lot of time, right? It takes as much time as they might give back to you, right? But that's not the point. The point is that they are learning something from you that is incredibly valuable. They see someone who has dedicated their life to something that they care about, which is incredibly, I think, important for someone to see that that you're doing something that's meaningful to you, that they can find something that's meaningful to them in their future lives. And so I would encourage you, if you don't involve young people in what it is that you're doing, that you do. And even if your volunteers are older people, right, we never stop learning. And so integrating the service learning aspect of it, the reflection. So for example, many of the things that the classes do are like, so students will go on a recovery or they'll participate in some aspect of our project, and they will literally write a reflection paper about the experience with questions that they've raised, with thoughts and reactions that they've had to it. And I've read several of these, and it's amazing. But I think in part they have these thoughts and experiences because they're forced to sit down and do it. You know, right? And so I would encourage you to do that with your volunteers as well. You will be shocked and at how rewarding it is for you to hear that. And number two, how actually rewarding it is for someone to go through that process. So thanks for being here today. And we'll take any questions that you have for either Tess or myself.
Any questions?
So many thoughts. First of all, Tess, you're a badass. That's literally one of the coolest things I've ever seen, so kudos to you for putting that together. One more comment and then kind of a question. So on interns, I've hired probably 4 of my interns now to be full-time team members for my organization. I just want to double down and say they're probably the best resource you can have, regardless of their age. They're there to learn. They're there to bring new ideas. We've gotten so many ideas from our interns, so cool that you're even like taking this and bringing it into the curriculum. I've done a number of projects with food recovery networks. They're awesome too. You mentioned earlier about kind of like it's great to be able to go and recover food and bring it to the local pantry, but how do you kind of take it to that next level? You've made some really strong relationships with Sodexo on campus. Have you done any audits with Sodexo to figure out, are there ways that you can actually decrease the amount of food that they're producing? Do you do like a food waste week where maybe there's only going to be a limited amount of food available and students can only get it? I'm just kind of like thinking through, how can we decrease the output originally so you don't have to recover so much?
So last year, we were doing 3 deliveries per week. And the amount of food has actually gone down. So last year we've only done 2, and I think this year we're only going to do 2 a week as well. So they've told us that simply by tracking and weighing and actually putting it all in one place, they are much more aware of what they're wasting, and that has impacted both their buying as well as their producing of the food. Principal Financial, the contract that they have with Sodexo is a little bit different in terms of the profit motives. So the Sodexo operation there, they have about the same number of people that they feed on a daily basis on the Principal Financial campus. It's huge. And so they have calculated with like money, right? We've calculated with pounds and things like that, and they've realized that they've reduced their waste and figured that out. But Principal Financial actually calculated out all the money. And they have figured out with even the money that they expend on the recovery, they end up with a net positive from there. And they've reduced a lot as well. So, it's kind of a drag for the recipient organizations because it keeps going down, but obviously that's a good thing.
Hopefully they're giving you some of those savings too.
We have a partnership on a source reduction study that we did with K-State Extension last summer and worked with Sodexo. And I can't quote it, but I believe they have a X percentage of zero waste by 2020 as is it 20% waste, or do you know?
I don't remember the exact percentage.
It was pretty, it was aggressive. Yeah.
They're a pretty impressive organization. Yeah. They're French. They're very interested in this, and so there's a fair amount of support. Well, there's definitely support that comes from the top, but even if there's support that comes from the top, it's really the people on the line that have to care about it, and they have, which is amazing.
Because it was the Sodexo employees that would package this food up and put it inside of the freezer, and then it was students that would pick up the food and deliver it. And we did start 5 days a week recovering when I first started my freshman year in 2015, but now it's 2 days a week, so a lot of reduction.
A lot of reduction.
I'm certainly not trying to diss the testimony in the project that Tess or any of the other testimonies that would come out of this, but did you, in the investigative or experiential-based learning, did you do any quantitative or qualitative research or data collection to show that it was, in fact, effective? I'm thinking
on the Drake campus?
I'm thinking just on the research level, not anything.
So I have not yet integrated it into an econ or a math class. I'm working on that. Right, I've had history, so they haven't done it for history, so I haven't yet done that, and that's something that I would like to do in the future, right, to have it actually applied to the relevant sort of skills and analyses that relate to that particular topic matter. So we as a student group haven't done it.
I'm thinking more on how successful your the project was, as far as mindset of a student goes, that kind of thing, not so much interdisciplinary, although obviously I would love to see it in econ too.
Do you know how we can do that, and can you help us?
That's why I'm asking you. So the program I work for is an AmeriCorps program, and it's a K-12 education and sustainability efforts, and we do pre-post tests, and it's very basic. So that's why but the whole, the program's this is only its second year in existence, and our whole goal is to change mindsets. to a more environmental, that happy green vision that we all in this room, I'm sure, would be of support of.
So I would say we have two levels of reaction to being involved in the program. For the students that are in classes that actually integrate it into their studies, they integrate it into classroom discussion, the professors relate it to the reading, I would say it's pretty high in those classes. But we also have students that are involved, like students that are members of fraternities and sororities that just sign up to do, a half an hour worth of service to get their service hours in for the year. I would say it's less on that. And so my ServiceLearning Ambassadors last year thought that we should do something about that, right? That they were just doing their half an hour of service. And so they integrated a reflection survey that went out to every single person who did a delivery, encouraging them to answer certain questions about their experience. Our hit rate is not great, but the fact that we're even doing that for people that are just kind of participating in a service sort of way has been pretty good. So one of our projects for this year is to figure out how we can deepen the meaning of that experience for those people. But another way in which we're doing that is we're sending out, we're trying to schedule so that we have a next course student group member go on a recovery with every new person or every other kind of volunteer so that they can use that experience, right, that time together to talk about why they're involved, to talk to that person about what the problems are that this, that are addressed by this project. So those are a couple of the ways in which we're trying to deepen the meaning of that experience for those volunteers.
I'm blown away by your project. It is very moving, and I look forward to looking at the page later on. I want to say I found that custodians in the work that I've done in K through 12 schools often end up being the champion in the school because they see the food waste, and as you pointed out, some of them may be very close to the issue of food insecurity as well, and so I found them to be some of the best champions. I've got a question for you. How did you integrate this into so many classes? That seems like a full-time job in itself. How did that happen?
I'm very good at begging and pleading, and I think that being a lawyer, I can be pressure and persuasive on my faculty colleagues, right? It really has taken pressure and persuasion. But actually, to be serious, it hasn't been that hard because I think the type of person that's in academia now does in fact appreciate the concept of experiential learning, and they are looking for ways to engage their students in the outside world in a meaningful way. So I would have to say that my faculty in general at Drake is pretty receptive. But with a project like this, there's so many different aspects of it that could relate to so many different disciplines that it's not like I'm limited to the environmental science people. It's worked across all sorts of different areas, and so that's also just the nature of it applies in lots of different ways.
Yeah. I'm not putting a microphone on. So we work with a lot of college students. We're a food restaurant organization in our city. One quick question: how do you guys transport the food? Do college students use their own cars, or do you guys provide a vehicle?
Yeah.
I have another kind of deep one, but I was just curious.
We use our own cars, or I've borrowed friends' cars in the past too.
Then can you guys talk a little bit about, we love our college students, but sometimes they're not always the most consistent of volunteers. Lives get really busy, finals come up, I have to cram for a test. So kind of what do you do, let's say, if someone doesn't show up for their shifts? Who does that fall back on to go and actually get that food, and how do you guys work with that?
So most of the time, we have 3 volunteers signing up for each recovery. So if there's one experienced volunteer and 2 other volunteers that are new, there's also one person in there that has said that they can drive, that they have a car. So if 2 flake, you've still got 1 person, and usually there's also someone who you can call if something does come up, and you can ask them to help out. That's our situation. I know there's been times too where it hasn't worked out and maybe the recovery's had to wait until the next day. But a lot of that food, it's been in the cooler just for the last 24 hours, so it could wait another 24 hours. But that is a hard situation. Sometimes just having people that you can rely on.
I would say one of the keys to the success is, though, that I have 2 people that are student workers, that it's literally part of their student jobs to help make that. Not that volunteers don't do as much, if not more sometimes, but for those crunch situations where someone actually has to pick it up, that also helps. But our Google Docs has, like, do you have a car or access to a car? Have you done it before? Right, and we try to get 3.
We always thought it would be cool to partner with the university and maybe have some groups. So.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Is there?
The Randy, this here, okay?
Yeah.
The kind of 2 questions. The first one I'm wondering is kind of what feedback and dialogue you have with Sodexo on an ongoing basis, because it seems like they likely get a good amount of value from their corporate social responsibility program that they would invest into their added activity in half of this, in terms of relationships with the university and apparently their other clients. And I guess in the second part of that, since it's kind of evolved into deep relationships with their staff, do you know much about kind of their compensation levels and how they're treated and so on and so forth? Because it seems that some of your activities are doing helping to paint that as a very positive picture there.
Mm-hmm. I can answer the second question.
Okay, go.
So your second question, anything that I posted based off of the recording that I had with any of these employees, I only transcribed things that they permitted me to. So there was definitely information that I learned that they didn't want me to post. And it could have been about their employment or their families, or there could have been names of people that they used, and they wanted me to take that out. So there is information that I wanted to go off of their preferences, and you're right, that does paint Sodexo in a great picture, but I also have to remember that these people are happy. Like, they're happy to be where they were working. They loved their jobs. I didn't talk to anyone that didn't love their job, and I did talk to some people that didn't want to be interviewed or have their picture taken, but the majority of these people are happy to be here.
So I'll answer the first question. We are in pretty good communication. I don't talk to them super often over the course of the academic year, but I definitely do. And so one of the positive things, so we're starting our 5th year, and just this past year, our Drake Sodexo has given us a grant of some significant money to do a project with. And I think, we haven't decided for sure yet, but I think our project is going to be addressing campus food insecurity for those students that they're part of the dining hall system for the first 2 years, but the other years they're not. So I think we're going to use that money to address those issues, both awareness issues as well as actual food insecurity issues. But just to let you, as a contrast example to what Tess was saying about our working relationship with them, I've tried to infect everyone with this project. And so I had a meeting with a country club, which will remain unnamed, and I went to go try to get them to recover, and I said that my students would do the deliveries, we'd set them up, we'd hook them up with the community partners and recipients and things like that, and we would do that for them. So all they had to do is figure out what food to donate, properly package it, and set it aside for us. And they listened to my whole spiel, and then at the end of my spiel, which was quite long, they said, well, we really don't have any food waste. And they have big buffets, like breakfast and lunch, almost every single day of the week. So I knew they produced stuff that they didn't use. And so the manager told me that they didn't have any food waste. And I was like, oh. And he said, because we use the food from those buffets left over for our employees, right? We allow our employees to eat it. And then he shared with me, you know, like many of our employees, right, are food insecure and don't have enough money to, right, properly feed their families. And so they're very grateful for the food that we provide for them. And I have to say, I was sitting there thinking to myself, okay, that to a certain extent is great that there's no waste. That certainly is, to a certain extent, generous to your employees. But number three, there just was not the mental connect, right, that you are not paying your employees enough. So it's a double-edged sword.
If I could ask one more follow-up, how did the grants thing work? Is that something that is that a formal program that Sodexo has, or is that something that just they elevate it once they establish a good relationship?
So I've also gotten a grant from the Harkin Institute, which is part of our university, which allowed me to hire my second SLA. But it was part of a larger Sodexo plan for leftover money that they have from the campus food programs. But we have been petitioning them to not only give it back to other corporate Sodexo programs, but for them to funnel it directly to us. And this is the first year that they've done that. So, you know, on my part, it's a lot of begging and pleading. But, you know, after 4 years, we got it. So it's been worth it.
Great, so I believe this is the end of our session. Will you two be around for the networking session that is directly after that? Great, so if you have any additional questions, feel free to find these two out there for the networking session. So another round of applause, please. For our